Please be seated for a moment. Well, I don't know about you, although clearly I've heard it from many of you walking in as we did at the 8 o'clock service, and others that I've come to encounter throughout this week at different times in different places. But clearly there is or should be a sense of gratefulness, a sense of gratitude that fills us, here in the Keys, here in many parts of South Florida, as we realize, what we did not have to experience. How many of us were glued to that TV, watching that track, day after day, and how ominous it seemed in terms of where it would be heading and the destruction that it would cause. And it certainly has caused much destruction, and we need to be grateful, but we need to clearly understand what others have received in terms of the effects of Hurricane Matthew. Gratitude, the quality of being thankful, but within that definition it also said, and the readiness to show appreciation for and return kindness. So it's not just, thank God, let me go about my way. It didn't hit me. I don't have to worry. I can go out and barbecue. I can do whatever I want. No, there's another angle to it. The quality of being thankful and the readiness to show appreciation for and return kindness. I wonder how many people who originally saw themselves in that cone. I wonder how many people, after clearly escaping destruction, I wonder how many people took time for prayer. I wonder how many people took time to be grateful. How many even to offer, clearly, perhaps even a token of gratitude, especially to those who had been affected negatively by that horrible hurricane's effects. Many years ago, a philosopher, Aesop, said, "Gratitude is the sign of a noble soul. Gratitude is the sign of a noble soul." And today in our gospel, I believe we have the example of a noble soul. A noble soul who was grateful. A good friend of mine many years ago wrote this book, Nameless Faces in the Life of Jesus. Nameless Faces in the Lives of Jesus by Father Isaiah Powers. And he speaks about this noble soul. He says, this noble soul was a leper. And he shares a bit about, certainly back then, the understanding and the word leprosy was used when many people were lepers, but also for anybody who had any kind of skin defect, because that just made people fearful. And all of these people were ostracized. All these people that had anything that physically showed them to be different were put aside, be they lepers or not. And many of them perhaps became lepers because of the contagion as well. But he says, 20 years ago, so he's talking contemporarily, lepers were people who suffered in every way possible. Physically, they endured escalating weakness, constant itching, and the pain of unattended sores. They also suffered from lack of food and from most unhygienic conditions imaginable. Psychologically, They were tormented by their own ugliness, uselessness, and hopelessness. They suffered conditions of beggary and the specter of swift approaching death. Socially, they were outcasts, and they had to stand afar off, warning, often with bells, healthy people not to get close to them. They were worse than nobodies. They were contamination. And spiritually, they were considered unlovable, and even by God. Superstition considered such sickness to be a curse caused by God as punishment for past behavior. This was even something clearly within the Jewish tradition that was understood. If you had done something like that, something like this had happened to you, you must have sinned. I'm reminded of, outside of leprosy, but just thinking of this horrible, horrible Hurricane Matthew, what happened during Katrina. If you remember during Katrina and the devastation that occurred, there were some ministers, there was some clergy that stood up in pulpits and said that those people that were feeling the effects and the devastation of that hurricane were being punished by God for their behaviors, for their sinfulness. How dare they? How arrogant they were. He goes on to say, there were 10 such lepers, this badly off, who lived near a village bordering Samaria and Galilee. And they all must have had some kind of faith. They came seeking Jesus out. And God had worked miracles in the past, and Jesus had already cured a number of people. Besides, what did they have to lose? They came only as close as social custom permitted them and shouted, Jesus, Master, take pity on us. And our Lord's reply was different than usual when he had done other healings. This time, because of the stringent law that we find in Leviticus, and remember, Jesus said that he came not to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. Because of that stringent law that lepers had to know their place, Jesus was very law-abiding. And he always had his eye out for the enemies, those who were trying to pull him down, the Pharisees, the Sadducees. He always had his eye out for them. And lepers could not return to normal society unless the priests, who also served, if you will, as medical board for that time, gave them a clean bill of health. They could not leave the land of the zombies and enter the world of real people until they passed inspection. So Jesus told them to go through their customs. And on their way, they were made clean. On their way, they were made clean. 10 went on their way and were made clean. But only one returned. Only one returned. Why? Why did only one return? Anybody?
Because only one was grateful.
Maybe only one was grateful. Who knows? He certainly was. He certainly was. And in this book, The Nameless Faces in the Life of Jesus, Father Isaiah Powers gets into trying to get into the minds and the hearts and the souls, perhaps, of faces that we've seen but then never heard anything more about. Okay? And he says, maybe there's other reasons, maybe there's other things that happen. The bottom line is, where did Jesus send them? On their way they got healed, but he sent them where? To the priests. So clearly, the other 9, because he only said one was a Samaritan, so the other 9 were Jews. The Samaritan could not go to the temple. The Samaritan could not go to the priest. So who did he go to? Jesus. And he returned clearly with gratitude. he returned clearly with gratitude. I truly believe at the center was this understanding of gratitude. But again, we must remember that he was Samaritan. He was outcast not only as leper, he was outcast as Samaritan. But he returns to Jesus. The foreigner, the outsider, the one who is not of that faith, returns to Jesus. And what does Jesus say to him? There are two very important phrases that follow in terms of what Jesus says to him. He says, "Get up and go on your way." Get up, because he's laid prostrate before Jesus, and go on your way. We've got to understand that in Luke, he doesn't use words frivolously. And we are now understanding for the past several weeks that Jesus is on his way to where? Jerusalem. Even at the beginning of this gospel, it says that Jesus was on the way to Jerusalem. Jesus was on the way, and what does he tell this person to do? To get up and go on your way. That's not just coincidence that Luke uses that phrase. Another thing that he says is, your faith has made you well. Your faith has made you well. But my brothers and sisters, if we go back to the original Greek, which is sozo, if we go back to the original Greek, it can either be well, it can also be whole, and what many other Gospels translate it as is saved. That's the fullness. That's the fullness. That's total healing. That's total wellness. That's total wholeness.